Welcome back to the Bible Stories. You may notice there are no ads on this video because YouTube has demonetized our channel. To support us, you can scan the first QR code to join the Bible Stories podcast app, where you can listen offline and access exclusive episodes. Or, if you simply want to give, you can scan the second QR code to donate directly. Thank you for helping us keep these Bible stories going. The fifth commandment does not use a Hebrew word for manners. It uses a word for weight. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. The word standing in the middle of that sentence is kabed. Its plain, everyday meaning in Hebrew is heavy, something with mass, something you lift with both arms, something that presses down on the ground where it is set. When God gave Israel this commandment, He told them to take two people and make them heavy. That is the answer, and it is worth knowing, because most of us were handed a much smaller version of this verse. We learned it as a rule about tone of voice. Say yes, Mom. Do not talk back. Under that reading, the commandment belongs to childhood and expires around the time you move out. The Hebrew has no interest in tone of voice. It is asking whether the two people who raised you have any weight left in your life at all. For some of you, that lands as comfort, and for some of you, it lands as an ache. You may have a mother who is fading and a schedule that has no room in it. You may have a father who never earned a single ounce of the weight this verse asks you to give him. Or you may be the parent now, sitting in a room where the phone does not ring, wondering when exactly you became light. All of that belongs inside this commandment. Hebrew is about to make it much more specific than we usually let it be. To hear kabed the way an Israelite heard it, you have to watch the word do ordinary work everywhere else in the Bible. When Abram comes up out of Egypt, the text says he was heavy with livestock, silver and gold. Our English versions say very rich, and that is the sense. But the picture underneath is a man weighed down, wealth as mass, prosperity as something that slows the caravan. When the Ark of God ends up in Philistine territory and the cities begin to suffer, the account says the hand of the Lord was heavy on them. Nothing symbolic there, a pressure they could feel, sitting on a whole region. When Isaiah is sent to a people who will not listen, God tells him to make their ears heavy. Ears so weighed down they cannot rise to catch a sound. That is a strange image in English, and a perfectly natural one in Hebrew, because heaviness is what the word does. Now put that same word in the commandment. Give your father weight. Give your mother mass. Let them be the thing in the room that cannot be casually pushed aside, which turns an abstract virtue into something you can actually measure. Weight shows up in a budget. Weight shows up in a calendar. Weight shows up in whose opinion still slows you down before you make a decision and whose does not. You can tell what carries weight in your life by watching what you rearrange your week around. Israel was told to put two names on that list and leave them there permanently. There is one more thing hiding in the grammar. Hebrew builds this verb in a form that means to cause something, to bring a condition about. The commandment is not describing an emotion that ought to rise in you when you think of your parents. It is telling you to manufacture something, make weight, produce it, which is a mercy because emotions cannot be commanded, and many of you have already tried. You can be exhausted by a parent, unhealed by a parent, still angry at a parent, and obey this verse today by deciding what they will cost you this week. And nothing in the sentence is conditional. God did not attach a clause about parents who deserve it. Every family standing at that mountain had its own damage, its own favoritism, its own long silences. God knew exactly what kind of households He was speaking into, He asked for weight regardless. Hebrew was not short of vocabulary here. If God had wanted a nation of obedient children, there was a word sitting ready, and Israel used it constantly. The word is shama. It means to hear, and in Hebrew hearing and obeying are the same act, because a word you truly hear is a word you do. It is the first word of Israel's daily confession, "Hear, O Israel." Every command in the covenant is built on it. If the fifth commandment wanted obedience, shama was the obvious verb. It is not there. God reached past it and chose a word about mass instead. That choice matters more the older you get. Obedience has a natural shape. It belongs to the years when you live under a roof someone else pays for, and it ends. A woman of 50 is not required to let her mother pick her church, her doctor, or her friends. No Israelite reading this verse would have expected her to, but she still owes her weight, and there is no age at which that expires. Paul understood the difference well enough to keep the two ideas apart inside a single paragraph. Writing to a church full of ordinary households, he says one thing to the children in the room and then quotes something older and larger. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother." Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Two instructions, two different words, and only one of them is addressed to children. Obedience is spoken to the young. The commandment he quotes was spoken to a whole nation of grown adults with their own flocks, their own households, and their own aging parents leaning on them. Honor was never the junior version of the command. It was always the one that outlasts the other. So the question the Hebrew puts to a middle-aged son is not whether he still does what his father says. It is whether his father still weighs anything. Every strong word in Hebrew has an opposite, and knowing the opposite is often how you learn what the first word meant. The opposite of kabed is kalal. It means light, slight, quick, easily moved. When the flood begins to drain away, the Hebrew says, "The waters became kal." When David sings over the graves of Saul and Jonathan, he says they were swifter than eagles, and that is this word too. Speed and lightness and easy movement all live in the same three letters. Then Hebrew does something with that word. It takes lightness and turns it into contempt. To make a person kalal is to reduce them until they can be blown off the table. It is the verb our Bible's translators curse, and it is colder than shouting and far harder to catch. It means to treat someone as though they weigh nothing. Watch it happen in a single sentence in Genesis. Hagar has conceived, Sarai has not, and the text says that Hagar's mistress became light in her eyes. Our translations say she began to despise her. The Hebrew is more physical than that. Sarai, the woman who owned the tent and ran the household, suddenly weighed nothing to the girl looking at her. Nothing was said out loud in that verse. A whole relationship collapsed in the way one woman looked at another. That is the exact word Exodus uses when it names the extreme opposite of the fifth commandment. Anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. Exodus chapter 21, verse 17. Set that beside the commandment, and you have a scale with two pans. On one side, weight, on the other, weightlessness. Israel was shown both pans and told plainly where its weight belonged. The penalty, sitting on the light side, lived inside the civil law of a covenant nation, and no private person was ever handed it to use on anybody. What it shows is how early God saw contempt coming and how much damage he expected it to do once it arrived. Because contempt rarely announces itself. It arrives as a tone. It arrives in the way you describe your father to a friend, the small joke that gets a laugh every time, the sigh before you answer your mother's call. Nobody in the room would call it cursing. Hebrew would. Sarai was made light without a single word being spoken. And there is a real difference between honesty and contempt, so let us name it before anyone leaves here carrying guilt they were never handed. Telling a friend you are struggling with your father is honest, and sometimes it is the only way a person survives a hard family. Turning your father into the running joke of every gathering is something else. One of those keeps a man solid while you tell the truth about him. The other files him down a little at a time until there is not enough of him left to take seriously. The test is simple enough to apply on a Sunday afternoon. When you finish speaking about your parents, is the person listening more able to see them as a human being or less? There is a second version of this commandment, and it uses a different verb altogether. Most readers pass straight over it. Leviticus 19 opens with a call to holiness, and then God starts listing what a holy life actually consists of. Out of every possible place to begin that list, he begins here. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 3. Revere. That English word is doing its best, but the Hebrew underneath is Yah, and Yah is the word Israel used for God. Fear the Lord your God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Serve him with reverence. Hundreds of times across the Old Testament, Yah describes what a creature owes his creator, a kind of awe that keeps you honest when nobody is watching. And here, God takes that verb, the one usually reserved for himself, and points it at two ordinary people who probably annoyed you at dinner. Nothing in Scripture makes a parent into God. The commandment does something more careful than that. It says, the posture you take toward the God you cannot see is learned first in a house, from someone at eye level. Long before a child has a category for a father in heaven, he is already learning whether another human being can be real to him, can be owed something, can matter while giving him nothing. Those settings go in early, and they go in deep. Many of you already know what it costs when those settings go in wrong. If the first man to wear the word father in your life was frightening or absent or cruel, then the word was damaged before you were old enough to protect it. Hear this clearly. That man does not get the final say in what the word means. God is not asking you to picture him as a slightly improved edition of whoever raised you. He is offering himself as the original that your father was only ever meant to resemble. There is one household in the Old Testament where you can watch this entire commandment come apart, and God describes the damage using the exact words we have been tracing. Eli was a priest at Shiloh, an old man by then, and he had 2 grown sons serving at the tabernacle with him. They were stealing from the offerings. They were helping themselves to the meat before it was given to God, and they were abusing the women who served at the entrance. Their father knew. He spoke to them about it, and they ignored him, and Eli let it go on. Whatever weight a father was supposed to carry in that house, his sons had already set it down. Then a man arrives with a message from God, and the message goes straight to Eli. God asks him a question that lands like a blow. Why do you honor your sons more than me? Kabed, the weight word aimed at a father who had put his boys on the heavy side of the scale and pushed God onto the light side. Eli had not stopped believing anything. He was still the priest. He still ran the sanctuary and still wore the garments and still spoke the blessings. He simply arranged his life so that nothing his sons wanted would ever be inconvenienced, and God read that arrangement as a verdict about who mattered. That is what makes the story so uncomfortable. Weight is not decided by what a person says about God. It is decided by what a person protects when the two things collide. And then God says something that gathers up both of our Hebrew words into one sentence. Those who honor me I will honor, but those who despise me will be disdained. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30. Read the Hebrew underneath that, and the sentence becomes almost mechanical. Those who make me heavy, I will make heavy. Those who treat me as nothing will find themselves treated as nothing. Weight given, weight returned. Lightness given, lightness returned. God is describing a scale that balances itself over time. There is a warning inside that for anyone raising children right now. The way you handle your own parents is the lesson your children are studying, and they are studying it far more closely than they are studying anything you say. They hear the tone you use about your mother the moment the door closes behind her. They are working out from you what a person is worth in this family once that person can no longer give anything back. Nobody in the house has to be told the rule. It is on display every week. Eli's household had already worked out its rule, and when the collapse finally came, it came for all of them at once. Hebrew builds one more word out of these 3 letters, and it is the largest word in the Old Testament, kavod. When Israel spoke of God's glory filling the tabernacle, this is the word they reached for, and its root meaning is weight. God's glory is his substance, his sheer reality, the fact that he presses on a room he enters. Israel had no interest in a God who was impressive from a distance. They wanted a God with mass. And there is one place in the Bible where that word becomes a person's name, and it is one of the saddest verses in the Old Testament. Israel has just lost a battle. The Ark of God has been captured, both of Eli's sons are dead on the field, and Eli himself falls when the news reaches him and does not get up. In the middle of that ruin, one of his son's wives goes into labor and does not survive it. Before she dies, she names her boy. The glory has departed from Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 21. She called the boy Ichabod, and the name means the weight is gone. A child grew up carrying that word around a village. Every time someone called him in for supper, they said out loud that the substance had left the nation. Hold that name next to the 5th commandment, and something clicks into place. When you make a parent light, you are doing to a human being what the Philistines did to Israel that day. You are removing the weight. Nothing dramatic has to happen. A person can simply stop counting gradually in a family that still visits at Christmas and still says the right things at the door. Which is why the commandment is written as a verb and not a feeling. Nobody can command warmth. You can command weight, because weight is made of decisions. 30 verses after the command to revere a mother and father, the same chapter of Leviticus gets extremely practical about what this looks like when the person in question is old. Stand up in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. I am the Lord. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 32. Read the whole verse, stand up, show respect, and then, in the same breath, fear God. Yeah again, sitting in the same sentence as an instruction about your knees. Israel was told to make honor physical. When an old man came into the room, you got up. It cost nothing except the small pride of the person already comfortable, which is precisely what made it a test. A society reveals what it believes about people by what it does when someone walks in who can no longer produce anything. And that word aged is doing hard work. Nobody struggles to respect a healthy, capable, contributing parent. The pressure arrives later. It arrives when she tells you the same story 3 times before lunch. It arrives when he cannot manage the stairs, cannot follow the conversation, cannot be left alone with the stove. It arrives when caring for a person costs money and hours you had other plans for. That is where the commandment finally has teeth, and Israel knew it, because in that world, an old person survived entirely on what their grown children gave them. There was no pension, no insurance, no check arriving on the 3rd of the month. There was a son, or there was hunger. There is another side to that verse, and some of you are standing on it. Leviticus does not only tell the young what to do, it also tells the old what they are. You are the person the room is supposed to stand for. Whatever you can no longer manage, whatever you have handed over, whatever help you now need to get from one chair to another, God wrote a law that says the weight is still yours. Nobody voted on it, it was assigned. So honor in Hebrew is measured in bread. It is the food carried down the road, the roof kept over an old head, the dignity defended in front of a village. Feelings were welcome. They were not the commandment. And here is where the promise at the end of the verse finally makes sense. Long days in the land is the language of a nation staying planted, and Deuteronomy uses that same phrase again and again about the whole covenant, not about one command and one lifespan. It was never a private contract a person could hold God to. Any family that has stood at the grave of a godly man of 30 already knows the arithmetic does not hold. What the promise describes is a road. A people who give weight to their weakest members build something that outlasts them. A people who treat their elderly as a cost are showing every child in the village what waits at the end of their own strength. That community has already begun to rot from the inside, whatever the harvest looks like. Then comes the question that has to be asked, because for some of you, the whole teaching hangs on it. Does giving a parent weight mean obeying every instruction they hand you for the rest of your life? The Bible answers no, and it answers with a story rather than a rule. Jonathan was the crown prince of Israel and the son of a king who had begun to unravel. Saul wanted David dead. He said so openly, he threw a spear at him, and eventually he ordered his own son to hand David over for execution. Jonathan refused. He warned David, he hid him, he stood in front of his father in the middle of a banquet and asked a question that put his own life at risk. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 32. Saul answered by throwing the spear at Jonathan instead. Before that, he had insulted Jonathan's mother to his face and called his son a disgrace in front of the household. And here is what Jonathan does with all of that. He never speaks of his father with contempt, not once. He calls him my father when he talks to David. He goes on serving in his army. Years later, when Saul marches out to the battle that will end him, Jonathan is at his side, and he dies there on Mount Gilboa, fighting for a king who had tried to kill him. When David sings his lament over the two of them, he sings about a father and a son who were not divided in death. Jonathan disobeyed his father completely and refused to make him light. Both at once, held together for years, at enormous cost. That is what the Hebrew has been describing all along. You can turn down a parent's demand and still refuse to reduce that parent to nothing. You can think your father is wrong about almost everything he believes and still be the one sitting beside him at 2 in the morning when his chest starts hurting. Honor was never a verdict on what somebody thinks. It was a decision about what they weigh. There is a harder case underneath this one, and a teaching on this commandment is not worth much if it walks past it. Some of you grew up frightened of your own father. Some of you had a mother whose house was never a safe place for a child. Scripture never turns this commandment into an order to put yourself back within reach of harm. Wisdom belongs here, and sometimes wisdom looks like a long distance between two front doors. What weight looks like from that distance is slower and much harder to photograph. refusing to let bitterness become the main thing about you, declining to make them the story you tell at every table, asking God to deal kindly with a person who never once asked him to deal kindly with you, doing whatever can safely be done from however far back you need to stand, and handing the rest to a God who was in the room for every year of it, who has forgotten none of it, and who has never asked a wounded person to pretend the wound was not real. When the Old Testament crossed into Greek, the translators had to find a word for kabed, and the one they chose is worth knowing because it changes the picture again. The word is timao. It comes from time, which is the ordinary Greek word for a price. What something costs, what you would pay for it. The same family of words is used when the Bible speaks of the price of a field, and of 30 pieces of silver called the price of blood, and of believers who were bought at a price. So Hebrew says, give them weight. Greek says, put a price on them. Both are asking about value that can be counted, which explains an argument Jesus once had that seems at first glance to be about something else entirely. Religious teachers had traveled out to challenge him about his disciples and a hand-washing ritual their tradition demanded. He answered by turning the light onto one of their own arrangements. A man could stand up and dedicate his land or his earnings to God. The declaration by itself did the work. From that moment, the wealth was consecrated, and consecrated wealth could not be spent on daily needs, which included the daily need of putting food in front of an elderly mother. In practice, the money stayed near enough to where it had always been. What disappeared was the duty, and it disappeared for the most respectable reason available in that culture. Jesus quoted the fifth commandment at them and told them they had found a fine way of setting aside the command of God in order to keep their own tradition. Notice what that accusation assumes. Jesus was not complaining that these men had been rude to their parents or had forgotten to visit. The charge was financial. Money that should have fed an aging couple had been routed around them through religious language, and Jesus called that a violation of the commandment, which means he read kabed exactly the way Israel read it. Weight you can count. Our version of that arrangement rarely involves a temple. It looks like a calendar so crowded with good and necessary things that a parent is left with the leftovers, and there are seldom any leftovers. A person can be sincerely occupied with the work of God and let that work answer for every visit that never happened. Nothing about the ancient loophole looked crude to the people using it, and ours does not look crude to us either. Which brings us to the only person who ever kept this commandment perfectly, and to what it cost him. He grew up in a settlement of a few hundred people where every family knew every other family's business. Luke tells us that after the incident in the temple when he was 12, he went back down to Nazareth with Joseph and Mary and was obedient to them. Roughly 18 years pass in that sentence. The Son of God spent them in a carpenter's household under the authority of two ordinary people, giving weight to a mother and a father who had to teach him a trade. And then, when he came back to that same town as a grown man and stood up to teach, this is what happened. A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. Mark chapter 6, verse 4. The Greek word behind without honor is atimos, without price, without value. Nazareth looked at him and found nothing worth weighing. They knew his family. They knew the house. They had watched him carry timber down the same street for years, and they could not make him substantial in their minds, no matter what he said or did. Jesus knows what it is to be made light by the people who should have known him best. He knows it from inside his own home. I want you to hold that, especially if you are the one sitting in the room where the phone does not ring. Some of you gave 40 years to a family and have watched your own weight drain away without any announcement. You are no longer consulted. You are managed. You are spoken about in the third person while you are still in the room. There are people who have gone from being the center of a household to being an item on somebody's list, and it happened so gradually that no single moment can be blamed for it. And he did not stay in Nazareth's estimate of him. The town that had weighed him and found nothing was not the last word about who he was, because the Father had already spoken over him at the Jordan and would speak again on a mountain, and neither of those sentences was ever put to a vote in the village. Hear this: the God who commanded weight does not measure you the way a schedule measures you. He was not impressed with you when you were strong, and he has not lost interest now that you are not. His own son was priced at nothing by his own neighbors, and God's estimate of him never moved an inch. The world's accounting and God's are two entirely different ledgers, and only one of them is accurate. So the answer to the question is short, and now it has some substance under it. Honor your father and your mother means make them heavy. Give them mass in your life. Let them count in your budget, your calendar, your speech, and your decisions. Speak of them when they are not in the room, like people who have weight. Feed them if they need feeding. Stand up when they come in. Refuse the small, comfortable contempt that makes a human being light enough to blow away. And do all of it, whether or not they earned it, because the commandment never asked that question. You will do it imperfectly. Nobody prepares you for the grief of the season when the parent who once decided everything can no longer decide anything, and the deciding lands on you. Choosing for someone without turning them into a decision may be the heaviest thing this commandment ever asks of a son or a daughter. Taking away a set of car keys is the small version of it. Do it anyway, badly, with help, and do not wait until you feel qualified. And if your parents are gone, this is not closed to you. You can still speak well of them. You can keep alive whatever was good in them by living it. You can forgive what still needs forgiving, which is often the last honor a child ever gets to give. Nobody arrives in this world under their own power. Somebody lifted you, fed you, and stayed awake with you long before you could say thank you for any of it, and no one has ever earned that. Weight was given to you first, before you had produced a single thing, and that is how God has worked from the beginning. He assigned your value when you had nothing at all to offer him, and he has never gone back and lowered the figure. This commandment is God asking what you will do when the lifting has to run in the opposite direction. May God give you the strength for it and the grace to know that in his eyes you have never once been light. If this video helped you grow deeper in God's Word, I want to personally invite you to be part of what we are building here. Every video on this channel takes many hours of study and careful research to make sure we bring you content that is faithful to Scripture and worthy of your time. If you would like to support this mission and help us keep making these videos, you can find a link in the description below to give a one-time gift or become a monthly supporter. Every gift, no matter the size, goes directly toward creating more content like this. And if you are not in a position to give right now, that is completely fine. The best thing you can do is subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and keep studying God's Word with us. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you richly.